and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and the mighty and wonderful Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. Are you well?
Yeah, I'm really good. I feel it's summer, the summer's arrived, and there's lots happening. And we have got the kind of indulgent pleasure of doing this show, just the two of us together today, which is great. I haven't done this since December.
Wow. Is it that long?
Yeah, it's that long. And we heard just before we came and recorded this that we have had 137,000 listens to our show of all time. And
amazing.
Amazing. So for us, when we started out, we had no idea how that would go. And I think it's to do with the guests. I mean, we've had some amazing guests, haven't we, since Christmas? We started off with Richard Selfridge and James Pembroke talking about data, which is a real hit. They were hilarious. I mean, how can you make data as fun as they do?
Do you know what? I've been working with so many schools and so many trusts, and I keep referring to that particular podcast that we recorded. I keep saying, you need to buy their book. You need to, and if you want a little in to what they're saying, tell them about the podcast, not to promote us, but they were just so brilliant, absolutely fantastic. So it's actually one of our episodes that I genuinely signpost people to, because Richard and James were so fabulous. Like you said, they made data sound enticing and seductive.
And what I love about them is that they are very pragmatic. They basically are saying data has to work, it has to be meaningful, and it has to be human. You have to capture children in the round, and you can't overload certain aspects of that with significance which doesn't exist. So I thought that was brilliant, and the spirit of it was amazing. And then we went to this trio of Ephrat first, then Dylan William and Sarah Cottingham, which was like the sort of triumvirate of the kind of cognitive science, edgy research geek out. So that was amazing, wasn't it?
It was like Glastonbury for cognitive science. It was like three main stage performers, one after the other. It was such a treat. And again, I have gone away and reflected on so many things that they talked about. The Ephrat first section, when she was talking about reconsolidation, I've gone back and listened to that again and again and again. It was just such a beautiful, crisp explanation of a part of the learning process that we don't necessarily talk about an awful lot, but I just thought she was absolutely wonderful, that session. And it's one of those that I keep going back to, and every time I listen to it I hear something else that I missed the first time around. So Ephrat was just an absolute treat.
Yeah, in fact, Ephrat first and Sarah Cottingham, the two of them, they kind of overlap in some of their thinking around making meaning, the progression from kind of fumbling with an idea to making meaning from it, and then it becoming part of your schema that sticks there. And to me, that has been a real, like, I wouldn't say light bulb moment like it was a flash, but it was like a sort of a kind of a deepening of my understanding. So when I'm watching lessons now, and it gives a reason for explaining why that child seems to be able to do it straight away, and that child is totally in the dark in the same room, because of the nature of the acquisition of knowledge, and it makes you realize how likely it is that within a room of children, some of the children are not getting it, even when others are. In fact, how predictable that is.
Yeah. And I think that Sarah is such a great storyteller of science as well. She makes it so clear to follow what is essentially quite a difficult concept and quite meaty, kind of deep, technical thinking, and she makes it so clear. She's got a real gift, I think, for making the difficult and the invisible real and tangible and accessible for everybody. So it was a real treat to listen to Sarah. And like I said, when I go into lessons now, it's almost like I've got Ephrat and Sarah sitting there on my shoulder. I listened about that. So that was a real treat.
Yeah, and Dylan was like, it's a tour de force. It's like a sort of greatest hits of the things he says. It's like if you just want to know the sorts of things Dylan talks about, it's all in that one episode. Boom, boom, boom. Like it's really packed. It's great. And that was a thing. And then we had a couple of episodes of two people who give a sort of different perspective to education. We're both very different. Aisha Thomas was talking about her whole experience about recruiting Black teachers in Bristol, and then leading that to a wider discussion about diversity and inclusion. And then Sufjan's take was all about deprivation as a kind of an issue which requires the same thinking in terms of inclusion and how. I mean, that was a pretty powerful episode. It was very moving listening to him talk about his own background, his upbringing, and walking children through the
lift,
lift with urine smell and coming to school with that, and then you've come to school with your kind of fresh coffee and your in your nice warm car, and that you meet and you've come from such different worlds, and there you are trying to sort of teach physics or something like it. That was amazing, wasn't it?
It was a real reminder that we'd had Dylan and Sarah and Ephrat talking about kind of the hidden world inside children's heads of how the learning happens. And then you've got Aisha and Sufjan talking about the worlds that the children live in, the outside worlds that the children live in. And I just think it was a beautiful marriage of the internal kind of mechanics of learning and then the lived experience of the learners in the classroom. I think listening to those as a suite of a kind of listens basically is such a lovely rounded picture of actually what happens to the children in the classroom, what goes on inside and what's happening outside. And I think that the work that Sufjan and Chilton are doing with community engagement and involvement is absolutely inspirational. And I don't use that word lightly, don't bandy that around lightly, but it's so innovative and so thoughtful, some of the things that they're doing. It was just a joy to hear the human side of the education experience, and then Aisha working tirelessly to try and make sure that our workforce is representative of our communities that we serve as well. So it was just a joy to listen to the human side of the job alongside the kind of mechanics of learning. So it was a treat, a proper treat.
Yeah, to me, I mean, it's interesting how you pick up stuff from people that sticks with you. So the thing a phrase that Aisha uses all the time, which was describing people as racialized as black, for example, rather than black. And so that sense that it's a kind of whole identity which is a kind of forced on people through, all these sort of power structures and stuff. And it makes you just think that's deeply in her psyche about how to describe people and how to relate to people's identity. And then you think, well, you don't come across that all the time. And to hear someone express ideas in a way which is not how you normally do, just makes you think so hard about it all. And to me, that was just fantastic. And then to after the last two people we've had, Jim Knight and then Vic Goddard, and to me, I mean, these are people who I genuinely look up to them. They're like heroes of mine, and so it's pretty amazing to speak to them. Vic, to me, is one of the most amazing people in education. I just think he's incredible, and he has this sort of, and Jim has the same. They communicate this kind of earnest sincerity about what teaching is for and who it's for, and in different ways. So Jim, like the whole instructional coaching thing and the importance of teachers being developed as individual people, and he makes me think hard about my work as a person doing teaching. He makes me question what I do in a way which I think is very healthy. Like, I think, when I say stuff, is it the right kind of message? Because that's what Jim's message is, slightly different to mine. So I think, I need to think about that. But go on, sorry.
No, I was just saying it's the placing of where we put Jim. And I know it was more to do with diaries than strategy. We can say it was strategy if you want. I just thought how wonderful to have that at the end of, here's how children learn, here's what children come to school with. Now, how do we develop our practice to match all of those things? It was just a really neat, for me, when I was listening to Jim, I was thinking, right, well, how would I then coach a teacher in all of the things that we've covered with all of these specialist guests? So it was a real joy to hear him explain some of those finer details of the coaching process as well, because you can read a lot about it and you can experience it, but until you've actually heard somebody who's been completely immersed in it for that long just explain it with such clarity and conviction, I think I learned so much from listening to Jim. I really did. He was just calm and human and knowledgeable and wise. He was really wonderful.
In fact, in probably what is one of my worst expressed questions ever on this thing. I kind of was working up to ask this question, and I kind of waffled around for so long instead of saying, basically I was trying to ask where you place.
You can't say it now.
I know. So no, should you direct teachers in what to do and ask them? And he basically says no. He basically, sort of, his answer was a one-word answer like that, or way down. And I just thought, oh, okay, that be that clear. But it was, you have to listen to it to get the context of that. But I just thought, he is very clear about that, and he kind of makes me think, all right, that's a really interesting perspective. I still feel like we're slightly at cross purposes a little bit in terms of context, because I'm still fascinated by this idea that in the US you have people who are coaches full time, and that is their work. And in England, we do not have full-time coaches, and so a lot of the work I do is about how you get a school with full of people who have barely any time spare at all to develop coaching systems. And there you get into this whole thing of needing more structure to support them in doing it, because you haven't got time to develop their whole professional self in that one aspect of their work, because they're doing so many other things. And I feel like possibly there's some interplay around our system experience. And of course, then let's just remember Vic, who is just the one that's just gone out. And I just find him, it's moving to talk to him, because I've been to his school, I know what Harlow is like, and he has this sort of capacity to be so grounded in his community in a way which I just think is so honourable and important. And you can't ask that of people. When people apply for a job as the head, you can't just say, I want you to give yourself to your school in the way that he gives himself to his school. It goes above and beyond. And there's the pain of the COVID experience and losing his site manager to COVID. That was tough to hear, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have that voice from the lived experience of the reality of school, that actually you've got somebody who's saying this is the theory and this is the research, but actually this is what it's like day to day, day in, day out. This is what it's like to lead a school. This is what it's like to lead a community. This is what it's like to be on the leading end and the receiving end of everything. And he does it with such heart and such conviction and such humility. It was just an absolute joy to listen to him. But what I took from him as well was that really important part of making sure you're the match for the school. And he made that connection it's like a relationship. There are many potentials, but you have to find one that you can work with, that you can basically have this professional relationship with the school. And I thought that was a really interesting and useful point for people who are potentially going into leadership, to think you've got to get that right match, because you've got to love it in the way that Vic loves it, to get the most out of the job for yourself, really, to feel that deep sense of achievement and worth and passion and righteous indignation that he feels. So I really reflected on the fact that it's not necessarily just getting a title, it's getting the job in the right place that's the right match for you. So I was really, really moved by what he said about the COVID experience, but also about finding your right place in education as well. So I loved talking to Vic. It was great.
Yeah, and so that was so really, I mean, as a sort of showcase of what people do in our profession, it's been really interesting, and we've got more people to come. So let's just talk then about some other things that have been going on. I mean, there's been lots happening in the 6 months. We can sort of span the time. What have you been doing? What have you been up to?
Lots and lots of bits and bobs. Started a new role, doing lots of with a new trust, and then I'm doing lots of work independently. I'm doing some work with a specialist project with the Charter College on reforming the primary curriculum, doing some work with Australia, doing some work out in Dubai on curriculum design, doing some work with the DFE again about flexible working, doing this with you, doing the In Action series. So lots and lots of fingers and lots of pies. Very exciting, very busy. Don't quite know how to fit it in some days, but we're getting there.
I wonder. I mean, Emma and I, so people who are listening, and Emma and I are sort of parallel editors of the In Action subject series. So I'm doing the secondary books and Emma's doing the primary ones. And I just had a conversation earlier today with Pete Jones, who's writing that Art in Action for secondary. And it's great. I love it. Every time you talk to one of these people, or sometimes they're teams, we've got like 4 people writing the history in secondary history in action. And these are all teachers who are so like passionate about their subject, and they know about it so deeply, and they're just trying to sort of showcase, signpost key ideas for people that, you know, in the inaction style, which is supposed to be quite punchy. So that's going to take another year, 12, 18 months to roll out, so they're all published, and we've still got a few to fill the gap. But how's your? I'm pretty pleased with how my lots go. How are your team doing?
I'm hugely excited about it. What makes me smile every time is these people are sending these amazing specialised people in their field. I send it going, is it okay? And I'm thinking, it's amazing. It's brilliant. This is fantastic. Yeah. This is absolute gold. And these wonderfully humble, amazing professionals are going, is it okay? And I'm like, yes, absolutely fantastic. So I'm really excited about having specialist books written for specialist subjects by people who are totally in love with their subject and know it inside out and back to front. And I've got so much to share with everybody, so really, really excited about that. But I've not been around the world like you have. You've been on your travels everywhere, haven't you?
I've done a bit of traveling. So I'll say, I mean, I had 2 particularly exciting travels for education reasons. One of them was to Brazil, which was visiting my old school, because when I was a child, I grew up as a sort of expat child, and one of the places we were posted to as a family was Rio. We can't complain. So,
I never knew this about you. Wow.
I lived in Rio from 1972 to 1974 with my family, and the British School of Rio invited me back to do a kind of big CPD event every year or every 2 years. Through COVID, it's staggered a bit, but quite a few people went there, and I was invited back, and it was great. So I got to do this keynote talk to all the staff of the British School in Rio. And I was able to show them my report from when I was at the school exactly 50 years ago. So literally 1973, I read out bits of my report. And I went back to my old classroom. I literally walked in and I saw it. I thought, oh my God, I sat here. And that means that room was around the corner. I went around the corner and there it was. I was thinking, oh my God, and that's where we played football, and really amazing. So that was a very special trip. Plus Brazil is just incredible.
Well, I should be waiting now for my invite back to Groovy in Leicestershire.
Yeah.
Not quite glamorous. Sorry, Groovy.
Well, one of the things that was lovely about that is that in my talk, that my report was signed by my teacher, who was called Mrs. Feitosa, Veronica Feitosa, and her name's on the report. So I read it out, and there it was on a big photo of it on the screen. And at the end, when her name came up, people went, "Oh, Veronica Feitosa, she was your teacher." And people were coming up to me afterwards saying, "Oh, she was an amazing woman. She was great. She taught my mum, or she taught my sister, or she taught me." Some of the older teachers were telling me. So it's like this woman had created this sort of aura, which I thought was really great. You know, I didn't realize that about her because she was just my teacher, but she was a kind of character. So that's
wonderful. And I especially like the fact I misheard you at the beginning and just heard Feitosa, who is one of the singers out of Steps.
Your references are not the same as mine.
Teaching in Rio. No, Veronica Feitosa, your previous teacher, not Feitosa.
And I'll tell you, and the other really lucky thing I've had to do is to go to a school in Bangkok called Patana, which is a really great school. In fact, we talked about it when we met Jim, because Jim Knight has done some work there as well. And he's done some work on instructional coaching. The school is, in a primary school, is using the walkthrough stuff. And it's an amazing school because it's an 8-form entry primary school. It's absolutely massive. So, and when you go to the year 5 area, there are 8 year 5 classes all there in this big space, and you know all off a shared space. So when you go to see any year group, you're seeing a lot of practice, and you get the sense of it's just so fascinating seeing how teachers with the same age group children in the same environment are so different. Like, they're variable, and yet there's this consistency through common techniques and common routines and a culture. And then within that, with all that consistency and commonality, each teacher is their own person. And I found that so interesting. Like, there's a real proof of that structures, to me, allow teachers to thrive and be themselves. And I saw that so nicely there. And they've done this really lovely work on coaching, a really great culture where people will share video, a lot of video, and talking about their practice. So I thought it was an exceptional visit. And Mark Verdi, who's the person coordinating that project with me and with Jim. He probably listened to this because he gets told when I mentioned him. He's a great enthusiast. Like, he comes on the Zoom calls, and he's just like one of a classic person of this sort of role. He's so enthusiastic about the work. It just makes you want to do it. It's brilliant. And to me, it's very motivating to work with people who are so into it. You know, they want the kids to learn more. They want the school to be better, even though it's already excellent. And that's a real. I love that. You can't replace that. It's a great sort of attitude. So that's been I've had a good time doing that.
Oh, fantastic.
But let's talk about some other things. And I feel like, because this is a kind of, thing where we're trying to, in a way, survey the land. And there have been some, I mean, it has felt like a tough 6 months in our profession in England, in the UK, because of some specific things. And I think we want to reference this. The whole Ofsted situation has been very difficult, and I get asked quite a lot about that, having personally had a bad Ofsted experience a few years ago, and losing my job from that, and that's kind of led me to be a consultant and so on. But having experienced that sense of kind of humiliation and failure in a public way, it is actually really painful to hear the story of Ruth Perry, who took her life after that, and her sister then telling the story. Now, of course, there's lots of complications around suicide which people know about. We don't even have to sort of go into that, but the fact that association is made so strongly by her family makes you think, it just can't be right, can it, that someone who gives their life to their school and works so hard ends up feeling to the point where they're sort of pushed over the edge. And it's just wrong. It's totally wrong. And I feel like there's a sort of groundswell of reaction to that, which has taken a suicide to kind of prompt it. But it shouldn't be like that, should it?
I think it's absolutely horrendous what's happened. And it was interesting that Sufyan, who we interviewed, he did the opening keynote for a research ed at Sam Strickland's school at Northampton, and he began his keynote because it was literally a couple of days after the news broke, and he did a minute's silence at the beginning of his keynote for Ruth at research ed. And I think the thing that resonated most with me was the fact of the lack of shock amongst the profession that had happened, that the amount of stress people felt. They weren't shocked to hear that somebody had felt like that. I think that was what really hit me, was the fact that, do you know what, this isn't people saying this is a one-off, or this level of stress can't be caused by an inspection process. I think the fact that so many people recognised that, not necessarily that they were in the same position as Ruth, but they had felt such immense pressure that they weren't surprised that somebody had potentially made that connection between the process and then what happened to Ruth, even though there were circumstances around it. And I do think that if there's such a high stress, high pressure system where the people who are trying to lead well are made to feel that level of pressure, then the system does need looking at really, really carefully, so that it is supportive and it encourages leaders to get better and to improve, and not to make leaders feel that they are, like the word you used, humiliated, or that completely destroyed by a process. I think any process that we have, whatever that looks like, should always be one that encourages and supports people to get better and to improve with whatever structure. But I think the fact that nobody thought it was impossible that connection could be there was the most shocking thing that resonated with me, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's, I've got an inbox. It's sort of slightly petered out in the last, year or so, but before that, year after year, I was getting emails from people. Sometimes it was from their partners, saying, "Have you got any advice? Because this happened to my husband or my wife," or and this feeling of like being hung out to dry by a system that you've given your life to is so bizarre that you do that to people. Like, you've got a system where we've got a recruitment issue as it is. We've got schools which are, in some schools, are so much harder to run than others. I mean, that's something I just feel very strongly about, that some schools are super challenging, and the people there on the front line day after day working really hard, and the problems are really entrenched. And yet, when it doesn't go well, you basically can be just like, thrown under the bus by the system as an individual with a big label on your back, rather than the system saying, "Okay, yeah, this is a tough scenario. Let's see what support can come in," and it feels like a kind of collective response, a community response. And it isn't. It's like you need fall guys or people to take the hit, and that's our culture. It's absolutely savage. And I think until we get rid of the inadequate grade, I mean, as a technical thing, I just don't think it will change. I feel like unless that goes, and it just becomes a different process, and the way things are reported to parents changes. And I don't know what the answers are. What do you think about that?
I don't know, because the flip side of it is that I've led in schools outstanding. I've led in schools that are in special measures, that we're almost closing because they'd had repeat inspections, failing inspections. I've worked in good schools and led in good schools. And I have had inspections that, like you say, were just, I felt like I'd been flung through a mincer. But then I also had other inspections where they were actually really positive experiences. We got to showcase the school. The inspection team really listened, and they were, I wouldn't say on our side, because it's not about sides, but they really took on board the context of the school, the work that we'd done. And what's worrying to me in that scenario is that it was individual and team dependent, because on the one hand we potentially have a team that came in and it was brutal, and then in the same school you could have another team come in and they were really lovely and really supportive. So I think it's potentially difficult to say that every inspection and every inspector is absolutely brutal and terrible, but because there are positive inspections as well, and there are positive experiences. And I think about one in headship that I had, one particular inspection, which was, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but it was actually a really positive couple of days where we felt like we showcased the school, and we kind of been a bit of an X factor, been on a journey, and kind of like we got there, and it was really nice to have the work validated. So it's really tough because
but I think it's important to say that, I think the people doing it are not the problem. I think it's the system. And I think the people at the leadership level, I actually think if you're responsible for running an organization which sort of has institutional shaming at its core sort of process, is you need to take some responsibility for that. But I think the people who go out there into schools to do it, they're just in the system, aren't they? They're part of the system. How much influence do they have to change it? They probably do their best.
Yeah.
But so that's the thing. I think that fundamentally, in my view, is 3 or 4 people, or 5 or whatever it is, going into a school they don't know for 2 days. That's like, it's an absolute farce. It's a joke that you can make an intelligent, reliable assessment of that school in 2 days. I just think it's a ridiculous expectation. And I've got emails, multiple, literally, I can't even share them, from inspectors who just say, "Tom, the thing they're asking us to do can't be done." And we all just fudge it the whole time. It can't be done. It's meaningless. We make these things up, then we look for evidence to back up our hunches, and then we write the report. And it's just so flimsy as an evidence, as a process. It should just be changed into something totally different.
Well,
so
I think that
lovely.
I think that education has changed so much so rapidly in the last few years as well. The landscape has changed. both because of COVID and because of changes in teacher training and professional learning. And I think that as a profession, our body of knowledge is very different from a few years ago as well. And I think that whatever the inspection process is needs to keep pace with and reflect the landscape that's out there. And so I think that now is the right time, definitely, to both through the lens of the kind of high stakes bit, but also about the changing landscape of education in the country as well. What's happened over the last few years with children's experience of home learning and teacher training. Now is the time to look and think, how can we make this so really supportive, really developmental, really accurate, and really helpful? Because ultimately that's what you want. You want it to be helpful for parents and the community to understand what's happening in the schools, but also you want it to be helpful for the schools themselves as they carry on with their work. So I think now is the time, because of a million different reasons, to look really carefully at what we do and how we do it, and making it accurate and making it workable and making it supportive for everybody that has a stake in it.
There are voices. I'm looking forward to let's talk to Caroline Derbyshire about this, because I know she's got views, and we're interviewing her soon. And because I feel like people think inspection is like a given. It just isn't. You don't have to hold schools to account by visiting them by strangers every couple of years on a couple of days. I mean, I'll say it again because it's our show. I can say it. I think inspection is a total farce. If it goes well, nice, and some people, they get good outcomes and they feel they deserve it, and because they work really hard for it, and I get that. But really, as a valid process, it's a kind of it's silly, isn't it, that we even allow it? It's a house of cards of validity, but it's to me, it's like the emperor's new clothes. Like, we keep on pretending that the inspection process has a rigor, but it doesn't. And it's sort of, we should just get rid of it. And I think
now is the time, Mr. Sherrington. Now is the time to relook at it with fresh eyes.
I'll get off my high horse now, but it's been interesting. Anyway, I want to change that, because we could talk about other issues, but I want to talk about something way more positive now, because out in the world of education are two absolutely drop dead stunning books about curriculum in primary, written by none other than Emma Turner. And here they are.
Hey, there we go.
You are really an amazing person, because all the things that you described, that you said that you've been doing, you didn't really even mention that you've published like another book, and kind of.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the other book. Yeah.
These books are absolutely fantastic. So I don't know if there's anything really like them. So I'll give you a chance to tell people what they are about it in your own words. But let me just say that these are books about primary curriculum, which have got a kind of intellectual kind of frameworking behind them, which is trying to make you think about primary curriculum as having this kind of identity, which isn't just a whole bunch of subjects which aren't quite as deep as secondary. It's like, forget about secondary. Let's talk about a curriculum which is just for children of that age in its integrated way, but which has got subject specialist components. The interconnected primary curriculum. It's really brilliant. And then the second book goes into some deeper areas. And I mean, there's so much interest. I mean, that's this first chapter that I've been looking at today, curriculum clarity and academic fidelity. And it's just so brilliant, because in here you're talking about how, if we are going to teach stuff well as teachers, we need to know why what we teach is in the curriculum and what its job is. And then you set out these lovely sort of like 5-point summaries of like the key things. This is why we have history. This is what it's for. This is what geography is for. This is what art and design are for. And I just found that so interesting, the clarity of that. And then you think that purposefulness, that real precision about what it is that we're trying to achieve while we teach these subjects, then leads you to be able to integrate and make it more holistic. But I just want to congratulate you. I think it's really
Thank you.
So what's the thinking for people who don't know? I mean, apart from the ebony and ivory, piano keys thing, I think I did a photo of them just trying to sort of nurture on my piano. What is the difference between Simplicitus, which is the first book, and Simplicitus Altius, which is...
Okay, so Altius means deeper. So it's going deeper with those simple concepts and elaborating a bit more on them. But the Simplicitus book was originally Principles of Effective Primary Practice, why it's different from, when I say practice, I mean include design and delivery of the curriculum, how that's distinct and different from secondary, how you might lead a subject in primary when you're a non-specialist, all the things that it's kind of a walk through how to be a subject leader and how to design your initial curriculum. Altius was born because as I started to kind of go out there in the world and work with trusts and schools, the same perennial questions kept coming up about curriculum design. You know, how do you work with mixed age classes? How do you lead a subject as a non-specialist? How do you avoid the chocolate rocks and Weetabix in tights and biscuit Stonehenge teaching where it's activity driven? How do you make rich, playful experiences that aren't just activity driven? So Altius takes all of these kind of perennial problems from primary and exemplifies those and talks you through how to do it. It also talks to, because I specifically in Simplicitus didn't put planning pro formas in there because I thought I don't want to kind of dictate how to set out your planning documentation. But when I went out there in the world, people are like, well, how do you document all of this? What do you write? How do you put it together? So I put the planning pro formas and documentation in Altius as well, to actually show how you can take all of this thinking and actually put it onto a piece of paper that's manageable and meaningful and helpful. And then kind of unpick some of the bigger problems, like what do you do if you've got a mixed age class where you've got years 3 to 6 in the same class? So you've got 4 academic years in the same class. What do you do? How do you write a curriculum for that class? What do you do about transition? What do you do about reading? What do you do about vocabulary development? So all of the questions people were throwing at me, I then wrote chapters on for Altius. So it was going deeper than the original Simplicitus book. It's
great stuff, you know, and it's a great sort of you're looking for examples, and so you've got this sort of, I'm a big fan of this, a bit of theorizing, sort of a conceptual framework. So we're not just like loads of examples of things. Sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees and you just see loads of examples, but sometimes it's so theoretical that you want to see what it looks like. So you can nicely combine those two kind of elements. And even like, you know, towards the end, there's a whole chapter about the transition to Key Stage 3, and you're trying to sort of show how the knowledge is woven together in Key Stage 2, say, but then it's got elements which are repeated. They're not just, it's not a mush. And you've got this sort of very well thought out, like 12 grid. I mean, it's got things like, well, you're always teaching vocabulary, number, representing information, knowledge about settlements, physical geography, chronology, knowledge of people. These are sort of common themes, aren't there? And you're trying to, I mean, that's how I'm reading it. It's all if you're a primary teacher and this will give you a whole like fresh view, and you think, oh.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I'm trying to get across in both books is this idea of the multi-novice status. So when children arrive at secondary, notionally, they are pretty fluent readers, pretty competent mathematicians. They've got fairly robust general knowledge. They can write. You know, when children early on in primary school and moving through primary school, those proficiencies aren't secured yet. So when you're trying to teach science or you're trying to teach geography, not only are they novice in the geography or the history or the science, but they're also novice in writing. They're also novice in number. So when you're trying to teach a standalone subject in primary, you can't really, because at the same time they're trying to learn the science, they're still trying to learn the reading, they're still trying to learn how to write. And so what you have to do is have this recognition of how the curriculum leans on each other, each of the individual subject disciplines, how they weave together. And you have to have this kind of, not just this vertical progression model, but you have to know how all of the other subjects feed into each other all the way through primary. So that grid there about the prerequisites is about, okay, so if you're going to teach about Roman Britain, well, actually, what else do they know need to know from across the curriculum before they even start to do Roman? So what do they need to know about number? How much do you expect them to be able to write? What do you expect them to know about geography, about where Rome even is? And it's recognition, like if you're teaching history, to a 6-year-old, their concept of time is virtually non-existent. So when you're talking about, you know, the Great Fire of London, and it was how many 100 years ago, some children could barely remember the difference between yesterday and last week. So you have to look at this multi-novice status and actually think, okay, let's look at this through a child development lens, as well as the multi-novice status lens, as well as the subject lens, because what we can't do is treat younger children like miniature versions of secondary children, because they're not proficient like secondary students are.
Multi-novice status is a good phrase. Captures quite a lot in that, doesn't it?
Yeah,
that example of chronology. I mean, I remember it's one of my older blog posts about children's sense of time. You sort of have, you know, last week, you know, when I was a baby, before I was born, and then there's like the olden days, and then there's prehistoric. So developing an understanding of how the Victorians is different from the Tudors in time, which is different from.
Well, I'll give you an example. The other day, I was in a lesson, year 5 lesson, and the children were writing stories which were set in the 1970s. And I was like, oh, well, that's when I was born. Right, how are you going to start this story? And this kid, no word of a lie, went, long, long ago. It's the same age as me. And she looked at me again and went, long, long ago. But I think that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with children who genuinely, 45, 50 years ago, to them, it might as well be 1,000 years ago, because we've got to remember in primary that we are dealing with children whose experience and understanding of the world is new and it's fresh, and there are multiple misconceptions across all of the subject disciplines, and you have to be aware of that as the primary teacher. So when you craft your curriculum, it's not just about crafting 12 individual curriculums, it's actually subject curriculums. It's about thinking, okay, well, how do we weave or place all of the individual elements together so that it makes sense as the children go along, and they can access it and make sense of it as they go through it. Because I think that a lot of the conversations around curriculum design have been through a single subject lens, and not necessarily from a primary lens, where you've got to be aware of how all of the subjects have this interplay with each other as the children move through.
It's kind of so interesting, isn't it? And it's funny you talk about these examples. Like earlier this week, I met a student. They were year 7, and they're talking about plants. And this boy was in a pair discussion, talking to his friend and saying how the Amazon turns carbon into oxygen, and that's why it's so important, because it takes in carbon and it turns it into oxygen, which is the lungs of the earth. And I was thinking, oh my God, like he's not like way off but it's like you've got that's the thing, like these trees becoming like this alchemy trees which turn carbon atoms into oxygen atoms, and kind of that's how we'd understood it. And it's like to know that's just by engaging with the media and listening to the news and hearing these phrases. But it was sort of in the lesson, the opportunity for this conception to come out wasn't quite there. So you're thinking that you're dealing with children who are absorbing information from all over, and they're bound to have all these naive views about the world. So you've got to always be thinking about it. Anyway, that was a bit.
And I think that in primary we're so uniquely placed as well. I mean, when I listen to Ephra and when I talk about Sarah, and they're talking about developing schema, I'm thinking primary practitioners are so beautifully placed to build really rich schema, because at no other point in their education after primary will they be taught all the subjects by one person who's got that overview of absolutely everything that they're doing. So make those deliberate cross-references to everything they're doing and knit it all together for them. Because as soon as they go to secondary, the art department don't know what the science department are doing, the science department don't know what the English department are doing. You can't make those connections. And if learning is about connection making, then the primary teacher is ideally placed to be the expert connection maker, not the expert homogenous soup curriculum designer, but actually saying, oh, look at this, that connects to what we were doing there. Do you remember about that? And actually articulating that. So a really well designed primary curriculum is about expert connection making to develop this rich schema of understanding across the curriculum. And I think it's a really underexplored and underdeveloped area of curriculum design.
I think it is. But it links into this kind of, it's almost like the ultra challenging. You've got this great section, a whole couple of chapters about mixed age classes. I've had conversations with teachers many times about this. How do you deal with this and mix and from when I was doing some work around sort of timetabling and curriculum design. But you articulate it so well. But what was struck me when I was reading those chapters was how some of the issues are just inherent in any year group. I mean, it's like mixed age between sort of, year 2 and year 3 is like obviously mixed age, but within year 3, they're mixed age. They are the age gap can be quite significant between the summer born and so on in terms of all sorts of other things. But also just that need to also roll in the different pace in which they've absorbed information. So you're flexing, but even in the more practical thing, as they say, topic coverage, and then do some really good, like quite nitty gritty, nerdy stuff about.
I ran that chapter by Sam Strickland. He proofread it for me, and he went, "That's really hard." He said, "It's really hard to teach mixed age classes." I'm like, yes, it is. It can be really hard, but it's interesting because I taught it for 25 years. Different classes. I've only ever taught a straight year group for 3 years. I've always taught mixed age classes just because of the nature of Leicestershire schools. But actually, weirdly, in 2 of those straight year classes, I had a bigger attainment spread than I had in any mixed age class than I had. So it's interesting that you say it's not necessarily just for mixed age classes, but it's actually worth looking at that section for any year group to actually think about, well, what do I do if I've got a massive spread of attainment in my class? Children working way above their age-related expectations, and children, who've got a long way to kind of go, or working well below age-related. So that was my little specialist wheelhouse.
No, it's good.
Stage section.
And there's some stuff in there around, like, there's a slight difference between, say, the topic selection. Let's say you're doing the Vikings with a particular mixed age class, and then they move up a year the next year, and what topics they encounter that year with, do they all now, how do we stagger the topics? And that's a slightly different issue from saying the attainment spread of, say, how well you write, which is a big bell curve. You've always got a range around that within any group of people. So it's anyway, people need to go and read it. It's hard to communicate it to you. I just think it's so interesting, and it's really well written, and it's just so I can't recommend it highly enough. So I hope it does really well. So I'm going to put it up on the screen again. Simplicitus Altius. And also, I do get a kick out of the fact that every chapter starts with a Latin quote. This is from Cicero. "Nothing is more noble, nothing more venerable than fidelity. Faithfulness and truth are the most sacred excellences and endowments of the human mind." And as you know, I just can turn around and look behind me here. This is my link to Cicero. This is my grandfather's translation of Cicero's Verrine, which is still a book that is used in schools today teaching Latin. And he published that in 1955.
What a neat segue that was. What a neat segue.
Every time I see Cicero, I think of my grandpa. Because he was a classics don at Oxford, and that was his world. So,
but the reason I'm beginning with a Latin quote is because I'm really keen to ensure that primary practice and primary teachers are seen as a highly academic bunch, that actually our curriculum content may be simple, but actually it's still highbrow, which is why I put the Latin in there to kind of academia it up a bit. without doubt. Anyway, look, thanks, Emma. Well done. Congratulations. Thank you.
It's been brilliant. And I think that probably brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Emma and I, we could talk for all day. We have our passions, we have our things that we're interested in, and we've been really privileged to have so many great guests, and we're really both privileged to work across the system in so many interesting ways and engage with teachers and leaders. So thank you for listening. We've got some great guests coming up before the summer, and keep listening. And thank you so much for your support for Mind the Gap.